just sort of a quick about us. Or actually, before I do that, I want to kind of see the room. Who is involved in fleet in the room? Show of hands. And just general sustainability, facilities. All right, so mostly fleet people. Okay, great. So we have Alameda County. We have about 1,250 on-road assets in our vehicle fleet, and we're about to cross the 100 threshold, getting 100 EVs on the road in our fleet, which we're really excited about. But we're kind of thinking what comes next. So we made an internal commitment to get to 30% EVs by 2030 internally in our program. So that means we're going to have to 4X, basically. We're going to have to get to about 400 EVs in the next 10 years. And so kind of we're thinking about scale. And with that in mind, that's really the theme of this panel, is managing EVs at scale. So we put together a pretty, I think, interesting mix of folks for this panel, and I'm going to really quickly just do a one-sentence introduction for them, and then we're going to dive right in. So starting with Brittani. So Brittani works with me on our team over at Alameda County. She's our climate fellow, specifically working on electric vehicles, and has been doing just an awesome job crunching numbers in our data, and she's going to be talking a lot about that. After that, we're going to be hearing from Sam, who's the founder of Mine Green Car and My Fleet Buy. Over here, Sam, raise your hand. So those companies are driving the uptake of clean mobility by consumers and fleets. So one of the startups that we're going to be hearing from today. After that, we're going to be hearing from Mark Kirstens, who's the vice president of global fleet solutions with ChargePoint, which is the world leader in charging station solutions. Oh, sorry. No problem. And then finally, we're going to be hearing from Bob Walsh, who is the senior manager of public relations over at Scoot Networks. So Scoot is another startup. They're based in San Francisco, and they do all-electric scooter sharing. So you're going to be hearing from a mix of startups, fleets, kind of public sector, private sector, all involved in managing EVs at scale. And with that, not yet. Okay, but the first person we're going to be hearing from is Brittani. All right, so Brittani, take it away.
So that was a great introduction into what I'm going to be talking about. Just EV-related KPIs that we have found to be really useful in our success converting to EVs. Can you all hear me? Okay. How can I go? Sorry, how do I? Is it this clicker? Okay, got it. So these are the three metrics that I'm going to be talking about. So the first one is N-trip state of charge, or N-trip SOC. Then we have energy efficiency and missed charge events. And I'm going to go deeper into what each of those means as we move on. One thing that we really want to highlight here is that we're able to gather and collect this data because we have telematics devices installed in all of our EVs. And we just really want to emphasize that as you convert to EVs, it's really important that you're also installing those in your EVs so that you can collect this data. And it gives you just a lot of really valuable insights. So N-trip SOC, so this is basically a measure of how much battery vehicles have at the end of their trips. And this is something that's really important to look at because it informs how much potential utilization you could be getting out of your EVs. A lot of times we're finding that they're not being utilized as much as our ICE vehicles. And it's also important as the technology revolutionizes, and we're likely going to be seeing that energy is going to be pulled back from the EVs to the electrical grid. So it's just sort of interesting to look at there. So we were able to pull about a year's worth of our data, and we actually found that over the year, our EVs were returning with about 61 to 70% of their battery left over when they were returning to their hub. So this is basically telling us that we could be seeing a lot more utilization out of our EVs. It also aligned well with our utilization data that tells us our EVs are going about 28 to 38 miles per day on average, and our non-law enforcement ICE vehicles are going about 60 miles per day. So 60 miles is still not that long in the scheme of things. Our lowest range EVs that we have, the Ford Focuses, they can go about 70 to 80 miles per day on average, and then our longer range EVs, the Chevy Bolts, can go about 200 miles per day, or miles per single charge. So this is basically telling us that our most of the trips that county employees take can actually be taken on an EV with where the state of technology is today. So then the next one is energy efficiency, and this is sort of we define it as miles per kilowatt hour. This is just the metric that we find to be the most useful. I know that the EPA defines this as miles per gasoline equivalent, miles per gallons of gasoline equivalent, but we just find that we're purchasing kilowatt hours, so this is the most relevant for us. And so we were also able to look into our data here, and we found something that was really interesting. So with the 3 primary EV models that we purchased, the sort of range and the energy efficiency was pretty narrow, so it was within 15%. So our Ford Focuses are getting about 3.6 miles per kilowatt hour, and then our Nissan Leafs are getting about 4.2 miles per kilowatt hour. So yeah, that's pretty narrow range. And basically the insight that we're getting from this is that right now it doesn't seem like it's super critical to be worried about this as you're making your purchase decisions on, which EVs you're buying. That's not to say, as battery technology improves, at some point this might be a little more critical, but at this time it doesn't seem to be super important. So then our last metric is missed charge events. And so this is basically the case where EVs are deployed out in the field and they're driven by employees, but as they return back to the hub, they're not plugged in. And this is primarily an issue for us at our self-serve pool locations. So these are locations where employees are out in the field and they're entirely responsible for picking up and returning the vehicles. We don't have any type of dispatch office to make sure the employees are plugging the vehicles back in. And we have a particular pool where we have 5 EVs and demand for vehicles there is incredibly high. So if vehicles aren't being plugged in, this has significant implications for our utilization. And when employees are going down to get vehicles, there might not be a vehicle that's charged and available for them. So this is an example of sort of how we look at this data. So this is Fleet Karma's charge summary, and this is an overview of a month's worth of data for one vehicle. So where you see that yellow arrow, that's an example of something that we want to see. So it looks like that vehicle was driven by an employee throughout the day, and then when it returned back to the hub, where you see the green and the blue meet, it looks like that vehicle was plugged back in immediately when it was returned. And then up there where you see that red arrow, so that's an example of what we consider a mischarge event. So looks like an employee was out driving in the field and then they just never plugged it back in. So like I said, that's a mischarge event and that has significant implications for our utilization. Also, one thing that we want to highlight about this is that this visual is really helpful for sort of eyeballing these events, but it's not great for running more fleet-wide, deeper analyses. So we think that sort of as EV fleets scale up, some type of software that can run wider, fleet-wide analysis is going to be really valuable. But to our knowledge, we don't know of any sort of services that do this. So we were able to do sort of a deeper dive into the data. It took a while, but we did do it. And so we found that over a 6-month period, 16% of the time that employees were returning their EVs back to the hub, they weren't plugging them back in. And so that is a significant number. And again, it has can have significant implications on our EV utilization. So we've been taking some steps to mitigate that and lower that number. So we have been hosting ride and drive events. So these are events where employees can come down and they can learn how to drive the vehicles, and then they can also, really important, learn how to properly plug them back in. Because a lot of the times we find that a significant barrier to even getting employees into the vehicles is that they don't even know how to unplug them or plug them back in. And then we've also been putting stickers in our vehicles just to really reinforce this idea that they need to be plugging them back in immediately. And so after we've taken some of these steps, we've actually had really positive results. So we found that in the 4 months following those steps, we had a 50% reduction in our mischarge events, which is good news. It's still not perfect, but it's better than it was. So basically, this is also telling us that you can't just, purchase the EVs and expect your employees to know how to use them. You're going to have to allocate some resources towards actually training them and, in order to be successful. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.